They called him the man who made the world laugh. But one child, just one, called him a clown. It happened quietly, in a crowded hallway after a screening. Chaplin bent down, smiled, and asked what the boy thought of the film. The boy hesitated, then said it's simple, unfiltered, honest. "You're funny, but not real." The people around laughed. Chaplin didn't. He only nodded, stood up and walked away. What looked like a harmless moment wasn't. Because for him, the word clown meant something heavier than insult. It meant the world only saw the performance, never the man behind it. And that night, when the lights went out and the theater emptied, he stayed in his seat, staring at the empty screen. The same one that had once made him immortal. He'd spent decades trying to make laughter look effortless. But it was this small encounter, not an award, not a scandal, that exposed what his fame had really cost. He never forgot that child's words. And 20 years later, he finally answered, "If this story reached you, where are you watching from? Drop your city below, and let's see how far legends still travel." It was spring in London. The air still carried the chill of winter, but the theaters were full again. Inside the Palladium, the crowd waited, families, reporters, dignitaries. On stage, a piano sat under the glow of a single spotlight. Backstage, everything felt rehearsed. Assistants whispered, cameras clicked. Chaplin adjusted his bow tie in silence. It had been years since he faced an audience like this, not as the tramp, but as himself. He'd returned for a tribute night. One more celebration of the man who built laughter out of nothing. The posters outside called him the master of emotion. Inside, the laughter sounded polite, practiced, almost careful. But something in the air had shifted. Between performances, he stayed quiet. He moved slowly, like someone remembering rather than performing. Every few minutes, someone asked for a photo. He smiled the same smile millions, and then, when no one looked, he stopped. He still carried that look people loved, but not the spark that once followed it. He listened more than he spoke, laughed later than everyone else. The applause hit him like an echo, not a connection. Everyone thought it was nostalgia. It was. Behind the curtain, he watched the younger performers go on. The crowd roared for them. They used his gags, his rhythms, his timing, like reflections of something half-remembered. Chaplin stood in the dark, watching a version of his own shadow come to life. He didn't move, didn't applaud, just waited for his turn. When the announcer finally said his name, the room changed. Every head turned, every sound paused. He walked out, steady, graceful, the image of control. But control is easy to mistake for peace. He sat for interviews afterward, surrounded by microphones. The questions came fast, loud, overlapping. How does it feel to be back? What does laughter mean to you? Are you proud of what you've created? He gave short answers, precise, neutral. No one noticed the distance in his eyes. Then from the crowd, a small voice cut through. High-pitched, innocent, curious. "Are you really a clown?" Laughter filled the room again. The reporters smiled, relieved by the innocence of it. But Chaplin didn't smile this time. He looked down at the child, then at the floor. It looked normal. That's what made it dangerous. For a few seconds, the cameras didn't move. The silence stretched too long. He finally nodded, almost like agreement, and stepped back. That moment would pass unnoticed by most of the room. But it lingered with him long after the applause faded. He had built his life on laughter. Now, it felt like something he couldn't reach anymore. The night would end quietly. The stage would empty. But something in him, the part that once turned pain into joy, had already started to disappear. The cameras were already rolling. Chaplin stood beneath the lights, still, measured, composed. Behind him, the backdrop shimmered with his old film posters, each one reminding the crowd why they'd come. He adjusted his cuffs, cleared his throat once. Dozens of flashes went off in quick bursts, turning the room into fragments of white. The noise never stopped, footsteps, murmurs, laughter trying to fill silence that didn't need it. He smiled for each photograph, lifted a hand, lowered it again. It was choreography by habit, not by feeling. Then the moderator leaned in. "Just one more question," he said. The audience quieted, chairs shifted, pens hovered. A child in the front row raised his hand. Small, nervous. The room turned to him. Are you really a clown? A brief pause. One heartbeat too long. Someone laughed in the back, then another. The sound spread polite, harmless, unthinking. Chaplin didn't join them. He looked down at the boy, then back at the cameras. For a moment he said nothing. Only his eyes moved. The boy why? Ted, fidgeting with the edge of his program. The microphone picked up a faint tap, Chaplin's finger against the table. 2, 3, 4 taps, then stillness. He leaned forward. Do you think I am? The boy shrugged. You make people laugh. A murmur rippled through the room, that half-laughter people use when they don't know what to feel. Chaplin nodded slowly. Yes, he said, but clowns wear masks to hide their faces. He paused again, just long enough for the silence to stretch. I used to do the same. The crowd stayed silent now, every eye fixed on him, waiting for the tone to shift back to normal, waiting for the joke that never came. But something had already changed. He looked at the audience the way a man looks at an old photograph, distant, familiar, tired. They laugh because they forget, he said, not because they understand. The boy tilted his head, not following. Chaplin smiled, the faintest trace of one, and said softly, keep laughing, just don't forget the person behind it. The room felt smaller. No one wrote anything down. The reporters froze, uncertain if this was a statement or a confession. And for 10 full seconds, there was no sound. Not from him. Not from anyone. He had spent a lifetime making silence feel funny. Now it just felt real. The moderator cleared his throat, breaking the pause. Thank you, Mr. Chaplin, he said, voice too bright, too practiced. The audience applauded automatically, loud, quick, mechanical. Chaplin stood up, nodded once, turned toward the exit. Flashes followed him all the way out, his shadow stretching across the stage floor. The boy tried to wave, but Chaplin didn't see. Or maybe he did, and chose not to turn. Outside, the night air was cold. He walked past the press vans, past the photographers, into the quiet street beyond. He didn't look back. The echo of applause faded behind him, replaced by the hum of distant traffic. Back inside, the crowd began to talk again. Someone joked about the tension. Someone else said it was just performance, but no one quite believed that. The child still sat in his seat, staring at the empty chair on stage. His mother leaned in. You see, darling, she whispered, he's funny, but he's serious too. The boy didn't answer. He only nodded, eyes fixed forward, trying to understand what had just happened. And on that stage, still warm from the lights, Chaplin's glass of water remained untouched. A single fingerprint on its rim. A moment too human to fit in a headline. The next day, the papers called it a rare appearance. They printed his photo, smiling mid-bow, mid-lie. But those who were there remembered something else. A silence that felt heavier than applause. He didn't know it then. But that one question, that one honest, childlike truth, had ended the performance for good. The hall was still full. People were standing now, clapping, smiling, talking to each other as if nothing unusual had happened. Cameras followed him to the exit. For them, it was another performance, brief, brilliant, finished. He paused near the door, turned once toward the stage and nodded. The lights hit his face again. To the crowd, it looked like gratitude. To those closer, it looked like hesitation. The applause hadn't stopped, but it didn't sound the same. Outside, the air was colder. A few photographers trailed behind him, shouting questions he didn't answer. He moved through them with practiced ease, the same way he'd walked through crowds for decades. But this time, no one asked for a joke. He entered the car without looking back. The door closed softly. Inside, he didn't speak. Only the sound of rain against glass filled the silence. What looked like calm was actually surrender. Inside the theater, cleanup had already begun. Assistants stacked chairs, folded banners, swept away confetti. A crew member picked up the glass of water still sitting on stage, the one he never touched. For a second he stopped and stared at it, before setting it aside. On the floor, the boy's crumpled program remained under a seat. Someone stepped on it without noticing. It left a faint shoe print across Chaplin's face. The night had ended, but the silence it left behind stayed heavier than applause. Reporters filed their stories within the hour. Chaplin charms London crowd. Comic legend returns in style. No one mentioned the pause. No one mentioned the child. In the photos, he was smiling, always smiling. Every headline repeated it. Every caption reminded the world he was still the tramp. But something in him had already changed. The next morning, the papers arrived at his hotel. He flipped through them without reaction. The words were familiar, almost routine. He'd seen his own name enough times to know it no longer belonged to him. Breakfast was served. He didn't touch it. He walked to the window instead, watching the city wake. The crowd still loved him, but now even love felt like noise. That afternoon, her invitation arrived, another event, another interview, another tribute. He read it once, folded it, and set it aside. The assistant waited for a response. There wasn't one. The letter stayed on the table until evening, when the housekeeper cleared it away with the rest of the day's paper. He didn't stop her. It looked like indifference. It was exhaustion. Backstage footage surfaced days later. A technician reviewing audio found a small clip, a few seconds before the question was asked. Chaplin leaning forward, eyes half closed, whispering something to himself. The sound was faint but clear enough to catch one word. Enough. The technician deleted it. He assumed it wasn't important. The following week, the tribute continued without him. New guests filled his seat. The child and his parents attended again, sitting closer to the front. When someone mentioned Chaplin, the boy whispered. He didn't look happy. His mother smiled, brushing it aside. He's old, darling. That's how great men look when they're tired. But she was wrong. It wasn't age. It was understanding. For the rest of that week, the city went on as usual. Films played. Laughter returned. His absence went unnoticed, at least publicly. But for those who had seen the moment up close, something lingered. A look, a pause, a tone too heavy to belong to comedy. They couldn't explain it, so they didn't try. He had spent a lifetime controlling silence. That night, silence had finally controlled him. Late one evening, a staff member found him sitting in the theater's empty balcony. The room was dark, except for the glow of the exit sign. He wasn't hiding, just waiting. Below, the stage sat exactly as it had before. Same lights, same shadows, different weight. He looked down at the empty space where the child had stood. Then he whispered something no one caught. He rose, took one last look at the empty stage, and walked out quietly. No camera followed. No one clapped. And that was the moment, unnoticed, unmarked, when the performance ended for good. The letter arrived 3 days later. It wasn't addressed to him, just his assistant. A single page from the event organizers. They thanked him for attending, but didn't ask him back. He folded the paper once and set it aside. No reaction, no conversation. Only the sound of the clock ticking somewhere behind him. That was how it began, not with scandal but with absence. Over the following weeks, invitations slowed. Calls came less often. Meetings moved on without him. Publicists explained it as a scheduling adjustment. But in truth, people just stopped asking. The crowd that once followed him everywhere had found someone new to applaud. The world outside still played his films. They ran on television, at small festivals, at midnight screenings. People laughed in the right places, applauded at the right time. But when his name appeared in interviews, the tone had shifted. Not praise, nostalgia. Not memory, distance. The applause hadn't stopped. It had just become polite. Reporters came to his gate now, not to celebrate, but to confirm a rumor that he was unwell, reclusive, finished. They didn't say it cruelly. They just said it as fact. He never came out to deny it. He didn't see the point. And then one phone call changed everything again. A studio in America wanted him to appear at a gala, a Lifetime award, a reunion of legends. He listened in silence, then asked only one question. Will there be children there? They didn't understand the meaning. He declined politely, then hung up. That was the last invitation he ever answered. Days became patterns. He woke before dawn, walked the perimeter of his garden, and returned before anyone else stirred. Sometimes he stopped halfway, watching the sunrise through the hedges. Inside, his study filled with unopened mail. Papers stacked, photos left unsigned. No one reminded him anymore. The housekeeper said the rooms were always too quiet. Even when he was home, reporters waited outside for months, hoping for a glimpse. Eventually, they stopped. The crowd stopped. Even the neighbors forgot who lived there. The laughter that had once defined him had been replaced by something else, an unspoken stillness that seemed to grow heavier with time. But the silence was only beginning. Inside the house, the walls stayed covered in old posters, the same smile on everyone, the same tilt of the hat. He never took them down, never replaced them. It was as if removing them would make the past too real to look at. At night, the projector sometimes ran alone. Reels of city lights, modern times the kid. He'd watch in his chair without sound, only the flicker of light on the walls, and the faint hum of the film spinning out. Letters from admirers still arrived, handwritten careful, calling him a genius, a treasure, a hero. He read them without expression. Some he placed in drawers. Most he didn't open. They came less often each year. Eventually, they stopped altogether. The silence didn't bother him. It just stayed. One morning, the housekeeper found him in the garden, still in his robe, standing by the pond. He was staring at his reflection, watching the ripples distort his face. He turned when he noticed her. "Did you know," he said quietly, "that even a reflection smiles back differently each time?" She nodded, not sure what he meant. He walked back inside. He didn't go outside again that week. A few months later, his last film was quietly removed from circulation. No statement, no outcry, just one more erasure hidden among new releases. He didn't protest. He didn't watch it again. He simply told his assistant to store the reels in the basement. That was the last time he mentioned work. The house grew quieter, meals shorter, days longer. He no longer checked the news, no longer watched the screenings sent by friends. Instead, he spent mornings walking from room to room, touching the backs of chairs, the corners of tables, the piano keys he no longer played. Each sound echoed longer than it should have. He had built a world that once revolved around laughter. Now it revolved around stillness. By winter, he no longer kept a schedule. He woke when the light reached his window. He slept when it faded. Sometimes he wrote single lines on scraps of paper, unfinished sentences, half-thoughts, ideas that went nowhere. The staff stopped asking what they meant. They just collected them quietly at night. One of them read, "Maybe the clown was right. He didn't mean the boy as insult or regret. He meant the truth underneath it, that the laughter he gave the world was never meant to come back to him." By then he seemed lighter, not happier, just done resisting. He stopped defending his silence. He stopped explaining the joke. He just let it be. In the last photograph ever taken of him, he's standing by his window, head slightly turned, light falling across one side of his face. The same look he once gave the camera. But this time, there's no mask behind it. The image was never published. It didn't need to be. By the time the final story was written, he had already disappeared from the noise that once defined him. The world moved on. The silence stayed. The hall was empty the next morning. The seat still faced the stage, untouched. A program lay open on the floor, half folded, half forgotten. The microphone remained in place, its cord coiled loosely around the stand. Someone swept the aisle, collecting cups and ticket stubs. When they reached the front row, they stopped for a moment, looking up at the space where the lights had shone too bright the night before. Then they turned them off. And just like that, the noise was gone. The newspapers arrived later that day. Photos of him filled the front pages. They printed his words, trimmed and rearranged. None captured the silence that came after them. The headline called it a moment of honesty. But the moment itself wasn't honest or staged. It was something in between. A small slip in a room full of cameras. Something the lenses caught but couldn't understand. But silence can be louder than applause. The boy's question replayed across interviews and columns. Everyone tried to explain it differently. Some said the answer was profound. Others said it was uncomfortable. No one mentioned that the boy never spoke again that day. He left with his parents through the side door, his head tilted down, as if trying to remember the sound of what he'd said. The cameras had already moved on. A week later, The clip was broadcast nationwide. The pause between question and answer was shortened. The silence was edited out. What the world saw instead was a perfect reply, rehearsed, clever, complete. But those who were there knew it wasn't that. They remembered the quiet between words, the distance in his eyes, the kind of pause that couldn't be written. History remembered the moment differently each time. The footage spread over the years. In classrooms, in retrospectives, in documentary, each version carried a different title, a different meaning, layered over the same 10 seconds of tape. What had once been real became performance again. What had once been pain became nostalgia. And the silence that followed was replaced by commentary. But not everyone forgot the original version. Technicians who worked that night said the room felt still, as if something had ended quietly without anyone noticing. No one clapped at the exact right moment after his answer. It took 2 seconds longer than usual. 2 seconds of truth in a room built for illusion. And maybe that's why it lingered, because it wasn't supposed to. Time moved forward, but the recording stayed the same. Film reels decayed, interviews faded, headlines blurred. Yet that clip survived, passed between collectors, archivists, historians, each of them hearing something different in it. One heard the breaking point. Another heard peace. Most just heard a man speaking plainly, and a world that didn't know how to listen. It was only 10 words. But 10 words can hold decades of silence behind them. In the theater where it happened, the stage was later rebuilt. The new one was smaller, fewer lights, no posters. Occasionally, a local performance group rented it out. They never mentioned its history. They didn't need to. The building itself still carried the pause, the space between question and answer. Sometimes, when the crowd was quiet enough, you could almost feel it again. A recording technician once said that, during the original broadcast, the studio feed went completely silent for several seconds. No music, no background noise, no signal interference. Just blank air. The network called it an error. But maybe it was. Maybe silence was the only thing the moment left behind. What looked like stillness was memory doing its work. Years passed. The clip was restored again, cleaned, sharpened, colorized. New generations saw it for the first time, thinking it was only another famous quote from another old film star. They didn't notice the flicker at the end of the reel, the one where he looks away, just for half a second, as if the question had followed him home. That part never made it to the broadcast. Eventually, the building where it happened was sold. The seats were removed, the floorboards polished. No plaque was installed. No one mentioned the night. But in a corner near the old stage door, someone had written a line on the wall in faint pencil. He wasn't a clown. No one knew who wrote it. It was painted over the next day. But the mark remained under the paint, invisible, permanent. The world didn't remember the silence that night left behind. It remembered the reply. The short, calm, human answer that no one knew what to do with. He had said it once. The cameras captured it once. And for some reason, it still breaks the rhythm of time every time it plays. Because silence never really ends. It just waits to be heard again. The stage is gone now. The crowd has faded into history. But the recording remains. Grainy, imperfect, unguarded. A man and a child. A question. An answer. And then the pause. That pause, still hanging in the air, long after both voices disappeared.